On that day, we helped the Lykovs to build a new hut in the spare garden. We dragged mattresses, blocks for the ceiling, and slopes for the roof onto the blockhouse. Karp-Isipovich, like a busy foreman, scurried here and there. "Get ready to die, but this rye," he said several times, anticipating a possible question, "why is this construction site in its 90s? After lunch, work was interrupted by an unexpected rain, and we took refuge in an old hut. Seeing my torment with the recording in the dark, Karp-Isipovich was generous with the festive light. He lit a candle from the stock that Agafia replenished yesterday. Agafia, with this radiance, did not fail to show her ability to read. Asking respectfully, "Tyatya, can I?" She took from the corner from the shelf the smoky, in wooden cinnamon with clasps, liturgical books. Agafia showed us the icons as well. But the long-term soot on them was so thick that absolutely nothing could be seen. Blackboards. They talked that evening about God, about faith, about why and how the Lykovs ended up here. At the beginning of the conversation, Karp-Isipovich gave his Moscow interlocutor an unobtrusive, careful examination. "What do I know about the creation of the world? When it was? What do I know about a worldwide flood?" The calm academic character in the conversation ended as soon as it touched on real events. Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich, his son Peter, Patriarch Nikon with his devilish pinch. 3. Fingered were for Karp-Isipovich irreconcilable blood and personal enemies. He spoke of them as if not 300 years had passed since these people lived and ruled, but only, well, about 50 years. Karp-Isipovich's words about Peter I, chopping off beards for Christians and smelling of tobacco, were especially strong. This Tsar, the Antichrist in human form, he put on a par with some merchant who had not supplied the Old Believer brethren somewhere at the beginning of the century 20. 6 poods of salt. The Lykovs drama is rooted in a folk drama 3 centuries ago, the name of which is a split. At this word, many will immediately recall the painting in the Tretyakov Gallery Boyrinia Morozova. In her image, Surikov focused the passions that boiled in Russia in the middle of the 17th century. But this is not the only vivid character of the split. The scene in this great drama was many-sided and very variegated. The Tsar was forced to listen to the reproaches and lamentations of God's people. The holy fools, the boyars, acted in alliance with the beggars, high-ranking churchmen, having exhausted their patience in disputes, dragged each other by the beards. Archers, peasants, artisans were worried. Both sides in the schism denounced each other as heresy, cursed and excommunicated each other from the true faith. The authorities rotted the most obstinate schismatics in deep pits, pulled out their tongues, and burned them in log cabins. The border of the split lay like a cool shadow even in the royal family. The Tsar's wife Maria Ilyinichna, and then her sister Irina Mikhailovna, more than once fought for the disgraced leaders of the schism. Because of what passion? Outwardly, as if for nothing. Strengthening the Orthodox faith and estate, Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich and Patriarch Nikon considered and carried out a reform of the Church, 1653, the basis of which was the correction of liturgical books. Translated from Greek at the time of the baptism of pagan Rus by the Kiev Prince Vladimir, 988, liturgical books from numerous correspondences turned into a kind of spoiled telephone. The translator initially blundered, the scribe cheated, someone else's word was misinterpreted. For 6.5 centuries, all sorts of inaccuracies have accumulated, many incongruities. It was decided to turn to the primary sources and fix everything. And then it began. They have already got used to incongruities. The corrections cut the ear and seemed to undermine the very faith. Serious opposition to the amendments arose. And in all strata of believers, from church hierarchs, boyars and princes to priests, archers, peasants and holy fools, encroached on the old faith. This was the voice of the opposition. A special protest was caused by the differences, ridiculous from our present point of view. Nikon, according to new books, argued that processions of the cross at the church should be conducted against the sun, and not along the sun. The word hallelujah should be sung not 2, but 3 times, to lay bows not earthly, but in waste, to be baptized not with 2, but with 3 fingers, as the Greeks are baptized. As you can see, the dispute was not about faith, but only about the rites of worship, individual, and, in general, small details of the rite. But religious fanaticism, adherence to dogmas, have no boundaries. All of Russia was agitated. Was there anything else that aggravated the fanaticism of the opposition? It was. Nikon's reform coincided with the final enslavement of the peasants, and innovations in the minds of the people were combined with the deprivation of their last liberties and holy antiquity. Boyar. Feudal Russia at the same time was afraid of the coming novins from Europe, with which Tsar Alexei, who saw how Russia got tangled with his feet in a long-length kaftan, did not put any special obstacles. The clergymen also strongly disliked Niconianism. In the reform, they felt the firm hand of the king, who wanted to make the church an obedient servant of his will. In short, many were against being baptized with 3 fingers. And a riot called the Split began. Russia was not the first in religious strife. Let us recall the European religious wars. Let us recall the Bartholomew Night in Paris, which became a symbol of fanaticism and intolerance, the night of August 24, 1572, when the Catholics killed 3,000 Huguenots. In all cases, just as in the Russian schism, religion was closely intertwined with social national hierarchical contradictions. But the banners were religious. With the name of God, people killed each other. And all these strife, which involved masses of people in their orbit, had their own leaders. In the Russian schism, 2 figures stand out especially. On one side, Patriarch Nikon, on the other, Archpriest Avakam. Curiously, they are both commoners. Nikon is the son of a man. Avakam is the son of a simple priest. And both, an amazing coincidence, are perfect fellow countrymen. Nikon, in the world Nikita, was born in the village of Voldeminovo, near Nizhny Novgorod. Avakam, in the village of Grigorov, which lies a few kilometers from Voldeminov. It cannot be ruled out that these people met in childhood and adolescence, not wanting to be enemies later. And on what a high score! Both Nikon and Avakam were rarely talented people. Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich, who from his youth was looking for support and talents, noticed both and brought them closer to him. Nikon made it scary to think about heights. The patriarch of all Russia. But let's refrain from the temptation to talk in more detail about the most interesting people. Avakam and Nikon. This would delay us on the way to Abakan. Let us return just for a moment to the Boyrina riding in a sleigh across Moscow. Karp Osipovich does not know who the noblewoman Morzova was. But she, undoubtedly, is his own sister in fanaticism, in readiness to overcome everything, if only not to overshadow with 3 fingers. The friend of the first wife of Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich, the young widow Feodosia Prokofyevna Morzova, was a very rich person, 8,000 serfs, mountains of goodness, a gilded carriage, horses, servants. Her house was the center of the split in Moscow. The long-suffering king finally said, "One of us will have to yield." In the picture, we see Feodosia Prokofyevna at the moment when she is being taken into exile in a peasant sleigh across Moscow. We see the appearance of the entire split on a wonderful canvas. Giggling priests, anxious faces of simple and noble people who clearly sympathize with the martyr, stern faces of zealots of antiquity, a holy fool. And in the center, Feodosia Prokofyevna herself with the symbol of her convictions. 2-fingered, and now let's return to the path leading to the hut above the Abakan River. You have already felt how far in time it began. And we should trace the source, at least briefly, to the end. The split was not overcome even after the death of Tsar Alexei, 1676. On the contrary, the departure of Nikon, pestilence that mowed down the people in those years by many hundreds of thousands, and the unexpected death of the Tsar himself only convinced the schismatics God is on their side. The king and the church had to take strict measures. But they only made matters worse. A dark mass of people started talking about the end of the world. The conviction of this was so great that there appeared in the split of the current, preaching for the salvation of the Antichrist voluntary departure from life. Mass suicides began. Dozens of people died from hunger strikes, locked in houses and monasteries. But self-immolation became especially widespread. Fire cleans, burned by families and villages. According to historians, about 20,000 fanatical supporters of the old faith were burned down. The accession of Peter, with his especially cool innovations, was accepted by the Old Believers as the long-predicted coming of the Antichrist. Indifferent to religion, Peter, however, considered it reasonable to not bribe the schismatics, but to register them, impose a double state tax. Some Old Believers were satisfied with this legality, others flowed from the Antichrist into the woods and beyond. Peter established a special schismatic office to search for those who were hiding from payment. But the Russian land is great. There were many secluded corners in it where neither the king's eye nor the king's hand could reach. Deaf at that time were places in the Volga region, in the north, in the Don region, in Siberia. In these places schismatics, old believers, settled, true Christians, as they called themselves. But life overtook, squeezed, stratified religious, everyday, and partly social Protestants. At the very beginning 2 branches of the schism were formed, priests and Bezpopovцы. Deprived of churches, the Bezpopovцы movement soon on the mountains and in the forest split into many sects. Accords and interpretations due to social heterogeneity, lifestyle, habitat, and often the whim of preachers. In the last century, old believers came to the attention of writers, historians, and everyday life writers. This interest is very understandable. In a house where many generations have been doing all sorts of alterations and renovations, changing furniture, dishes, dress, habits, suddenly discovered an old closet with great-grandfather's utensils will invariably arouse curiosity. Russia, which has changed beyond recognition since the time of Peter the Great, suddenly opened its closet in the forests and on the mountains. Everyday life, clothing, food, habits, language, icons, rituals, old handwritten books, legends of antiquity. Everything is perfectly preserved in this living museum of the past. Moreover, many rumors in the Old Believers were opponents of the serfdom and the Tsarist power itself. This side of the matter prompted the exiled Herzen to probe the possibility of an alliance with the Old Believers. But he soon became convinced that an alliance was impossible. On the one hand, in the communities of the Old Believers, a class that was completely in accord with Tsarism arose. On the threshold of the revolution it was represented by the millionaires Guchkovs, Morozovs, Ryabushinsky, descendants of peasants. On the other, inner darkness, fanaticism, and obscurantism, contrary to the nature of human life, reigned in many rumors. This was exactly the sense called runner. People saw salvation from the Antichrist in the royal guise, from the corvée, from the oppression of the authorities only in running and hiding. Old believers of this persuasion rejected not only Peter's barber, tobacco and wine. Everything worldly was not accepted. State laws, military service, passports, money, any power, games, chance and everything that people, not being afraid of God, could invent. Friendship with peace is enmity against God. We must run and hide. This exceptional asceticism was within the reach of only a small number of people, either poor or, on the contrary, strong, capable of enduring hermitism. Fate brought both those and others together. Runner's life all the time pressed, drove into the most inaccessible jungle. And now we can see the historical path of 300 years to the forest hut above Abakan. I ask you to share these videos in your social networks using the buttons under the video and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafia Lykova, which you now see on the screen in the end screensaver.